I guess we can just introduce ourselves and kind of talk about, we're all going to talk about a different angle, I think, of the exit strategy and or working with partners. Do you want to start?
My name is David Boraks, and I'm a Lion alum, I guess you could call it. I graduated 3 years ago when I shut my sites down north of Charlotte, North Carolina. I had a couple of local sites in some suburbs there and ran them for about 9 years. And I could talk at length about what happened, but basically I wasn't really making any money, and I decided it was time to do something different. So I now work at WFAE, the public radio station in Charlotte, as a reporter and a host. And you can address first.
Okay. I'm Kelly Gilfillan, associate publisher for a company that just bought my sites last week. But I was CEO of Hoem Page Media Group. So I'm going to talk about what my exit strategy was and how that all went down.
My name is Burkins. I started the website metro.com in Charlotte 10 years next month. So we'll be celebrating our first decade. I started it by myself, and I've often felt that we would be much farther along had I not been a solopreneur.
Well, let me jump in since I'm already out of the biz, but I have really two things I think about when I think about partners. Like Glenn, my site started out and it was just me. One day I got up and I realized, hey, you can use a blog to do local news in your small town. And I started doing that, and it became very popular. And there was a moment of truth about 6 months in when I realized, am I just doing this for fun or a hobby, or is this a business? And I made the decision that I was going to try and make a business out of it. And like all of us, I knew nothing about running a business. And so very early on, I decided that I needed to get some help with things that I didn't know about or things that I didn't want to do. And I'm a straight-ahead journalist from a long time back, and the idea of doing the business side made me feel uncomfortable. Over the years, I kind of came to understand that you really can't ignore that. But one of the first things I did was to hire a consultant to help me put together a media kit and to get an ad offering together because I needed the revenue. So in that sense, I think of partner as not necessarily a business partner who has a financial stake in the business, but just a partner to do some of the things that need to go into your business. And that got me off on a good foot. The person that I hired was a former publisher of American Banker, which was a daily newspaper in New York for the banking industry. And she came right in, and in 3 months she had a media kit, and we were going out on sales calls, and we sold our first ads for more money than I thought you could sell an ad for. And this was in 2007. And so it got us off the ground. So in that respect, taking on somebody who could help me with that. Now, that transitioned eventually to I hired somebody else part-time to sell the ads using the materials that we had put together and the structure that we had built. So we were off the ground with that. Another aspect of partner that I think about is that, you know, running a business and being the editor of a news website are two different things. And I did set up a structure for, you know, keeping track of revenues and thinking about goals. I had a business plan where it was classic .com era kind of, my revenues are going to be $50,000 the first month, and in 2 years I'll be making $2 million, you know. I had that kind of business plan, but constantly being revised over time. But I needed somebody to do the basic things like keep the books. And so I hired somebody part-time in 2008. And she eventually worked herself into a full-time job with me. She turned out to be somebody who was a jack of all trades. And she started out keeping the books and keeping the website running. And then when we started to get more ads, I was doing the ad design initially. She took over the ad design and then eventually managed our salespeople. And we got up to 2 salespeople working part-time. But anyway, that was something that I didn't have to worry about. So again, somebody else who was thinking about other parts of the business besides the journalism side, which allowed me to concentrate on the journalism side. And I was still the publisher, and I still was kind of driving the direction we were going and making a lot of the key decisions in consultation with my number 2, but it really made a difference to not be doing this all by myself and having to, you know, worry about all of that. And Eventually, we got up to, I think we had about a dozen people, including 4 full-time employees, and it was going along pretty well, kind of barely sustainable. And we put together a growth plan for our business. We ended up having 2 sites in 2 of the suburbs north of Charlotte. And we realized that to get the revenues and to actually get some of the ads that we were having trouble getting, we needed to be a little more regional, which meant adding 2 more town sites in our area, which would have been a natural market of about 120,000 people. And to get to those next 2 sites, we needed to double our revenues. And so we put together a business plan with what were much more reasonable ad revenue projections, and we hired a new ad salesperson who was more experienced and was working full-time for us, and that was our plan to get there. Our business fell apart when the ad rep kind of imploded and the business plan collapsed, and we decided that we wanted to do other things with our lives. But I often think if we could have just held on a little bit longer. So in order to do that expansion at that time, I had to figure out where am I going to get the capital to do this, to hire the ad salesperson. And I looked at all the possibilities. I went to the bank and said, can I get a small business loan? And they looked at me and they said, well, what's your business? I said, it's local news. And they said, what's that? It didn't look like anything they had ever made a loan for. So that was kind of off the table. I had a couple of business advisors I was working with informally, and they said, well, are there people in the community that would invest in your business? And that's where I started thinking about taking on a financial partner. And I talked to a couple people, and I ended up with this one guy who said, I could write you a check tomorrow for $100,000. How is this going to be structured? And you should be thinking about where you think your business is going. And I looked at that, and then you get into discussions about, well, how much of your business do you give up? And so I owned 100% of it. I had to start thinking about what is my business worth at this time. And probably at that moment, my revenues were about $100,000. And we came up with some numbers, and he said, well, here's how I would look at it. And there were options for owning a percentage of the business. There was an option for it being a loan that could be converted into equity. And then he said, where else can you get money? And he said, honestly, my loan converted to equity is going to be more expensive than getting a loan from somewhere else. And I had already tried the bank, and we talked about it for a while, and my business was not really far enough along and obviously sustainable to make somebody comfortable about making an investment like that, which is why a loan would have cost me so much. And he said, what about home equity? And that was a big decision for me. I ended up taking a home equity loan to finance our expansion, and that's a big decision, and you may not even have that option to you. It was an option for me, and that's the one we went for. My wife went for it, and that's how we did the expansion. And we were well on our way until we kind of hit that implosion point and decided that we didn't want to do all the work that was necessary to make that leap. And I think a lot of businesses get to that point. But, if I had it to do over again, I think I would have tried to start out from the very beginning with a financial partner or an equal partner who could have helped me with another piece of the business that we didn't really know. I mean, ideally, I would start out with 3 partners, and all with equity stakes and all willing to work without pay for a while. A news person, a business manager person, and an ad salesperson. And good luck finding an ad salesperson who will work for free, I guess is the bottom line on that. But there are people out there.
Actually, can I go
Sure,
out
jump
in? But because I think I'm kind of the counterpoint to David. As I said, I started mine alone. And I guess I would counter what David said in terms that he wasn't making any money. He had revenues of about $100,000, and David and I go way back. We've talked about this 1,000 times. We both live in Charlotte or the Charlotte area. Imagine if the people who were on his payroll were equity partners. You can go out and hire talent, absolutely. But 2 things I would say. One, no one will work as hard for you, or no one will work as hard as they work for themselves. If you hire someone, they will give you pretty much the amount of work you pay them for, if you're lucky. When you own something, I mean, and I think you all can attest to this. You go to bed with it, you wake up with it, you're thinking about it at dinner, you're thinking about it at church, you're thinking about it wherever you go. You're thinking about this business. You can't buy that kind of dedication. If you think of some of the most successful businesses in America, and I'm just going to name a few: Sears and Roebuck, Hewlett Packard. Even though it's called Apple, there were two people. Whatever. Many of the most successful companies in America were started by two people who were very different in some ways. Some had skills in one area, some had skills in another area. You can always go out and buy talent, but if you only have $100,000 in revenue, you're not going to get the kind of talent you want, and that $100,000 would be better spent somewhere else. I feel that Q City Metro would be much farther along if I had someone else who went to bed thinking about Q City Metro and woke up thinking about Q City Metro. As it is, I'm the only person who's foolish enough to do that. Even though I recently hired an editor and she's doing a great job, I am positive she does not worry about Q City Metro the way I do. And when you're starting a business, that's really what it takes to launch it. You have to live with this thing 24 hours a day. And unless you've got some really deep pockets, you can't buy that.
That's true. I did start with a partner. We were 50-50 partners. Susan Leathers was the journalism side, and I was the business side. My background has always been sales and marketing, but along with the marketing, I was also a medical technical writer at one point, and then I did freelance writing for 8 years while I stayed home with my kids. We started the business in 2009, and we had complementary skill sets. We had some crossover, and we, knew each other from church, and so I knew she was a good person. She knew I was a good person, and she was actually her idea to start the site. We started BrentwoodHoemPage.com in 2009, and had just that one site for 3 years. We met with a business broker. We had a business coach after the first year, and we worked with her for 3 years, I think. And one day she had us meet with a business broker. He wanted to talk to us about exit plan. Like if we had decided we wanted to build it to sell it, what did we have to do? And he kind of explained to us what a buyer would be looking for, where our revenue needed to be. And so we went back to the table and built a business plan based on that. 2012, we started our second site, and then 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, we started new sites. And so got up to 8 sites. But Susan left after 3. In 2014, she exited. And let me say right here before I forget, if you have a partner, you need to have a partnership agreement. You absolutely have to have one. Because it saved our friendship in the end. When she decided to leave, it was all in black and white, and we knew, what we had signed, because we'd already talked about it way before it ever happened. And so, do that. So when she left the business, I kept with the expansion, 1 site a year, and decided, I guess in the spring, I was going on a long trip, and so I was going to be gone for 7 weeks. And so I had to hire someone to come in and be me while I was gone. So I hired an interim CFO. I have an editor. He runs all the editor side, and the editorial side, and I ran the business side. And so she came in, she kind of helped me really take a look, and she's an accountant. So we kind of reorganized my books so that I could see things more easily and I could make decisions going forward. I did break out my revenue by site, so I knew which sites were profitable and which sites were not. And the trip I was going on was really to kind of figure out what direction I wanted my life to go on. And on that trip, I decided that I wanted to scale back the company, make sure it was cash flowing, and then spend the next year trying to find a buyer. And it all worked out. So when I came back, I made tough decisions. I let 2 people go. I pulled back on 3 sites, did not have editorial going into those sites except press releases. I didn't want to shut them completely down in case a buyer might want those particular sites, but I was able to make really 4 key decisions. I went virtual. That saved me $2,500 a month on not having office space. I let 2 people go. I pulled back of the editorial on those sites, and I was cash flowing really well within 2 months. And which is kind of frustrating now that I think like I could have done this. If I hadn't started 3 more sites,
I could have done this.
I could have done this, yeah. But in the meantime, 2 new players entered the market, and one, I actually knew somebody who knew them, and so I kind of just mentioned it to them that I might want to talk to them about selling. And so that conversation started, and that had been going on, I don't know, we probably met like 6 or 7 times. It had been about a month, and then the day I got the letter of intent from buyer number 1, buyer number 2 knocked on the door. And another media company that had formed to buy 3 Southcom properties in May. And so the word had gotten to them that I was looking, and so they came in, and then the whole thing happened in like 6 weeks. It was crazy fast. Because I already had the other offer on the table, they had to move fast if they wanted to play. So, but, you know, I guess this all worked out because back in 2011 or 2012, I met with that business broker. And I continued to meet with him as friends. Our kids were friends, and he said, you know, I could never have afforded that business broker. He's like does multi-million-dollar deals or billion-dollar deals. But he was very interested in my business. He reads Brentwood Hoem Page. He cared about it as a community member. And so he continued to meet with me over the years. I would meet with him like twice a year. This is where I'm at. What do you think? Should I pivot this way? Should I do that? And he was always very generous with his time. So always take advantage of that if you have it. I did end up having a broker who was very familiar with the industry, had built and sold several businesses, and definitely helped me get more money in the long run. So I recommend that if it's an option for you. What else did I say?
Since we've kind of broadened it a little bit here to include the idea of the exit, when I was thinking about shutting my site down, I did put the word out in my community that we were going to probably shut down, and was there anybody interested? And I ended up, there was 4 people kind of circling around. One of them was a competitor who just wanted to buy my URLs and get my traffic that way, and the offer was like $500 or something, and I'm not interested. One of them was a person who ran an events business in the area who really wanted my traffic because I helped him build his business by promoting his events. And the one that was most serious was a guy that we had partnered with on a Help Wanted site. And you know, he had a digital ad business, and he started a Help Wanted site, which we were in on, and he wanted my traffic. Everybody wanted my traffic. And he was working with a business broker and or a business coach, and he got pretty far along in the process to where they made a formal offer, and it was $20,000 plus a future payout, which was contingent on my continuing to work for the business. And as I mentioned earlier, I kind of got to the point, my partner and I, my coworker and I decided that we both really wanted to go do something else after all those years. We were kind of tired out, and the idea of continuing to work for the company and waiting for a payout, which was, one was going to be 2 years out, one was going to be 3 years out. And it just seemed like a long time to wait for a payoff. And also the projections that he was using to get to the size of the payouts he was supposedly offering, I didn't think the business could get there, and I didn't think that he was the right person who could get us there. So I did not feel comfortable with it, and I ended up not taking his offer either. So I do sometimes have the same feeling like I could have done it, but there are many other factors that go into that. So.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm lucky that I get to continue to basically run the business. I'll be serving as the associate publisher of the Williamson County market, and then there's another publisher who runs the 3 Nashville properties that they bought. And so I basically don't have to pay payroll or the freelancers or rent or any of that, and I still get to do my fun job. So it's like the best case scenario.
Let me ask you a question. Let me say something about my situation and ask you about yours. So when I was looking at taking on a financial partner and getting somebody to invest or give me a loan, the question came up of how much is your company worth? And I mentioned at that time we had about $100,000. It was probably actually a little less than $100,000 in revenue. And so do you value it by your annual revenues? We're in the eyeballs business. Do you value it by eyeballs? I looked at different things. A lot of businesses were selling by a multiple of your eyeballs. I came up with a couple back of the envelope things, working with another business advisor. But I never felt really comfortable that I knew what my business was worth. So you've just gone through this. How did you decide what your business is worth?
Well, my broker told me to not put a value on it, to let the market tell me.
Okay.
And because I had two people at the table, I was able to get a really good look at, both letters of intent and see how they were doing it. And it was a percentage of revenue. Now I know somebody who I won't say who it is, but he got dollar for dollar annual revenue, but his revenue was kind of low. So with mine, my revenue was about $700,000 last year, and this year, because I had peeled back on the 3 sites, was going to be more close to 600. And that kind of hurt me because there was a decrease in revenue, and they'll use that as an excuse. And then they picked a percentage of what they thought it was worth, and then we went back and forth several times, and there is parts of the deal that my employment agreement was part of the deal. I had to come along with the company, and so I have a 3-year contract to stay and work, and there's an incentive package there too for me. So that was a lot of moving pieces. It wasn't just about the company; it was also about me and what my salary would be and benefits and all that stuff. So it kind of
And you had to
complicated
open up
it.
your books to their auditors, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, that's not fun.
So when I shut down, my revenues were up to about 165, and I had the 1-to-1 number in my head. I thought, I would sell this for 165. But the guy that I was working with, and with his business coach, and obviously they were trying to cut a deal, but they didn't see it that way. And I don't think the deal that we were talking about would have been. I don't think it would have gotten up to half of our revenues. And I'm not sure our revenues would have stayed in place after the sale, because the guy that I was talking to was not a journalist, and he was talking about getting rid of some of the coverage we were doing, and I kept trying to tell him, we have all of these visitors because they like what we have, and there's always going to be that push and pull between the financial side trying to make it work and the news guy who says, I know how to get these eyeballs.
Yeah. And it also comes down to like what percentage they pick, or whether it's, they can do it on, it can be based on EBITDA. I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but earnings before interest, taxes.
Depreciation and amortization.
Thank you. I never can remember the amortization part.
You had amortization?
No.
I never got that.
No. So yeah, just EBITDA.
Yeah.
Anyway, they'll usually do it on EBITDA and then X times that, or they'll look at your cash flow, and so or your revenue. I mean, and so I mean there's a lot of different formulas for that, but the point I was making was if you're a distressed business and you're not cash flowing, it's not a good time to sell, because that percentage is going to shrink of what they're willing to pay. And so you before you go and put it on the market, you need to be cash flowing for a good year to show that steady, to show that the customers are going to pay. I wasn't in that position that I was cash flowing a lot of money until I made all those hard choices, and not expecting to sell for probably about a year, and then it happened quickly.
I think
When you say cash flowing, I'm sorry, but do you mean like having an excess of revenue over expenses?
Right.
You have a positive cash flow?
Yeah,
Is that what-
positive. They want to see that the owner's paying themselves because they're going to have to pay the owner or pay somebody to replace the owner.
Just wanted to make sure I
Yeah.
understood.
So they want cash flow there, that the company would take, or that they would have the money to replace you.
one other point I'm just thinking about as we talk about both taking on a partner and exiting. They both require you to have a business structure that can be examined and valued. And if you're earlier in the process with your sites and you don't really look like a business yet, you want to get to the point where you look like a business and you can give numbers that are realistic numbers on a spreadsheet. And do you have a business manager? Do you look at things monthly? Kind of taking it back to basics here, but you really do want to treat it as a business, and that goes for everything about this. I mean, are you just doing this as a hobby? Is it something that you're doing for fun, or is it something that you're really treating like a business?
Right.
Or are you doing it as a job to employ yourself?
Right.
So taking a little bit different tack, did any of you consider, or have you considered the idea of keeping the business going, but having someone else take over as an exit strategy, taking over the day-to-day operations and staying on board as a publisher?
Actually, that's kind of where I see myself going. I think the day may come when I just want to sell and get out or whatever. I have a daughter. She's shown no interest in wanting to do it after watching me for 10 years. Can't blame her for that. But I want to give you my daughter's number. I want to call her. But I think that is another possibility. Just kind of get out of the business or hire someone else to. I'm attached to this thing that I created. Even if I'm not running it, I would, and maybe I would sell part of it or whatever, but I'm attached to it after 10 years. I put a lot of sweat equity and financial equity into it. David and I were talking before we came up here. I've essentially gone 10 years without any substantial contribution to a retirement account because that's a luxury at this point. So, I'm not going to just let that go cheaply.
I guess another point to make is, again, thinking about this as a business and thinking about all those little considerations as something that gets you to that point. One of the other considerations was non-financial, but could your business run without you? And
That's one of the reasons I went to Spain.
How
Because
do
I
you-
wanted to see if it could run without
how do you get there? There's another session after this, which is going to talk about work-life balance, and I'm going to join in that conversation. But, do you have the ability to get away from it and have it not go out of business?
And that's my goal. That's what I'm working on now. I've hired an editor to take that part. That was necessary. I am not above even hiring a publisher to run the business.
Just send Glenn the checks.
Send me my check wherever I'm retired to.
Right.
No, but
Right out there.
but
Yeah, on their boat. The SSQ City Metro.
yeah, the SSQ City Metro.
We picked out a yacht.
It's not right out there. But yeah, I think I do think that's an option and a possibility.
I wanted to say something before I forget that when as you're putting your business together, or you already have put your business together, one of the things I didn't think about it until this was all happening, because it typically in these situations when you're selling a property like this, it's an asset purchase. And so what you're creating as you're putting all these different pieces of your businesses together is an asset. Your CRM is an asset, your QuickBooks is an asset, your website is an asset, your archives are an asset. If you're trademarked, copyrights, all of these things were
URLs.
on your URLs, all of these things were on the list of my assets. And so it's kind of, I wish I'd thought of it that way sooner, because I think I would have paid more attention to the CRM. I would have paid more attention to, I probably would have bought more domains. I think I already had a domain addiction. I had 45, so. Yeah, well, I kept trying to protect myself. And then I was getting, as I started expanding, I kept buying more domains thinking, I'll go there next.
Kelly, when you sold your business, was there much discussion from the potential buyers about scale? Some people may be thinking, well, I only want one site, or I may not have started my site yet. Will I ever reach that level of Kelly's success if I don't have multiple sites?
I don't think you have to scale. I mean, that was my business plan, was build to sell. But I also didn't expand really smartly a couple of times, and it made it look like it wasn't a working model, right? So when I finally left the county and I went to a different county, it didn't work. So what they ended up wanting was the 4 successful sites in Williamson County. That was, what they
Do
wanted.
you think the multiple site path is the best path to success, or might you have done it differently knowing what you know now?
I think that whatever path is going to make you cash flow. And if that's one site and you're kicking butt with cash flow, just do the one site.
I've got more of a philosophical question. Was it worth it?
Oh,
How many years did you put into it?
9.
You put 9 years
I
into
am counting.
9 and counting.
You got a percentage of your revenue. Was it worth it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to respond to your question, Uriah. We actually, about 5 years into my business, we talked about, we had 2 sites, and our business plan was to add 2 more. And as I said before, that was a natural market in our area of 120,000 people. We ran into some trouble with the multiple site strategy, which is that the advertisers in our area didn't want to buy one site or the other, the way those towns were. They wanted to buy the whole area. And so we had success selling our whole readership. But what we didn't have was a single brand. And so I owned a bunch of URLs too, and I finally have let them all go. And some of them I got for defensive purposes. But
We'll have to talk about how you came to the decision to let others URLs go, because I need some help, buddy.
yeah, you got the addiction too. Anyway, just to finish my thought, we built a kind of a dummy or a almost there site for a regional site, which the area where we are north of Charlotte is called Lake Norman. And so we had a LakeNormanNews.net, which would have been an overarching brand. And we talked about, is that an entry page for 4 separate pages? Do we combine it all together with tabs for the different towns? And one of the problems we had was our brands were so strong in the first 2 towns that I would have been giving up something. And I was trying to figure out, is there a way to do both at the same time? I think from an advertising standpoint, it would have made sense to have just one, and we didn't get there. So.
And you let LakeNorman.net go?
Actually, I still own LakeNormanNews.net.
but you're right. I will go back and I say stick with the one. But what happened with my business was, as I expanded, I did Brentwood, then I did Franklin, then Spring Hill, and then Nolensville, and then I had the 4 main cities in the whole county. It's a very wealthy county, and so it was very sellable. But once I got to the 3rd site and the 4th site, and I started approaching it as a county buy, that's when I started getting the agencies. That's because I had enough traffic that they were willing to talk to me. They wouldn't talk to me when I was just Brentwood homepage. So there's power in that, and there's uptick in revenue, but not every time I expanded did the revenue increase more than the expenses. So when you go, Brentwood and Franklin are my most successful sites, and they cash flow really well. But as the expansion went, my model didn't always prove true. So
If I had it to do all over again, I would have the 3 business partners, the news, business, and advertising people, all equity partners, and I would go with one site for the reasons that we just talked about. And
that's the model at NewsHawk and Berkeley Side, and they do great business.
The flip side of that, and I'm nowhere near doing this at this point, But I could actually see spinning off rather than starting another, something else. We do a lot of event promotions. People come to our site a lot for events. I could see spinning that off into its own thing at some point, and just making that a standalone vertical.
Yeah, just diversifying revenue.
We sort of did that with our specialty sections on our site. It's more like a newspaper model, I guess, but we had a sports section that was regional. We had a food page that was regional. We had an obituary page. We had a pets page that was regional. And those appeared on our 2 sites, and they would have appeared on 4 if we ever got that far. And initially, we tried selling those separately with some limited success, but ultimately it was kind of like you were talking about, the bigger advertisers wanted to buy all our traffic, and it didn't matter where it was. So anyway, you had a question?
If you've been in it for 5 years or so without a partner of any kind, it sounds like for the most part you would prefer to have someone start it with you. But how do you bring someone in when it's late?
That is the challenge. It is much easier to bring them in the beginning. I mean, if I bring someone in now, how do I value the 10 years I've gone without, retirement? How much, things that I put into it? I think it might be cost prohibitive at this point
Well, how much
But
is it
getting
worth?
evaluation is very expensive too.
How much is it worth to you, though, to get that extra expertise or whatever you're adding? I mean, I was talking about a financial partner who would have had no role in the business, just putting equity in to grow it. But
I've never wanted that because once again, if it's just an equity partner, and I've had people approach me about that, just wanting to invest. But my thinking is, and I said this before, I want someone who wakes up thinking about growing the business. I don't want someone who wakes up thinking, what's my dividend this month or whatever. I want someone. I want someone in the trenches. If I'm Steve Jobs, I want what's his name? Wozniak. Yeah. If I'm Hewlett, I want a Packard. If I'm Sears, I want a Roebuck. I'm not looking for someone just to throw money at me unless I'm Zuckerberg.
I do think if you found the right person, and let's say we're bringing in somebody for a specific skill set, I think you could say, I would give this person 20% of the company or 25 or whatever it's worth to you to do that. It would be part of your negotiation of how they're getting paid. I mean, and it could ramp up.
We also don't have any revenue at this point. So even though we've been around for 5 years, it's not really a business yet. So is it now?
So that would be easier than to say, we don't have any value, so bring them in at 50% and they get 50% of zero right now, I mean,
and depending on what you need that person to have and a skill set, if it's a financial person, then, work on a you could possibly, and I'm not a legal advice, this is not legal advice, but, and earn in and earn up and earn, or earn in and earn up. You might find somebody that is willing to, I had an offer one time, somebody was willing to put in $20,000 for, 30% of the business or something,
or their sweat equity. People can come in and work for nothing, and if they, you can arrange it any way you want to, and after so many years, they would own a certain percentage of the business, or they would go up. There are any number of ways to do it. I think it would take a special person to want to do it that way, but
right.
There are 1,000 ways to do it if you're really committed.
And if your exit strategy is to sell, you have to be careful how you structure things, because the buyer really likes it when you own 100% of it. They get nervous about 50-50 partnerships. They want somebody to have, more of a say. And so that's something to consider when you're doing that and when you're setting up a partnership.
Can I follow up on the retirement part of this? I had a conversation about a year ago with some folks at the Ford Foundation who were suddenly realizing that all sorts of entrepreneurs all over the country who are trying to, craft the future of local news also are not contributing to a retirement account
Right.
now.
Right.
And that has some implications, and they were looking at it from the big picture of what a foundation could do that would be transformative to local news.
Yeah, or Social Security. I mean, for that matter, if you're going to fall back on the government, I started my sites when I was in my early 40s and, mid 40s. Just took a chunk out of what I was contributing to Social Security in addition to any kind of a retirement. And
My Social Security hasn't been hurt that much. They sent me an estimate, and I don't think that's.
well, if you made enough earlier, you're in pretty
Yeah.
good shape, probably.
I look back sadly at what I used to make.
Yes.
Don't we all?
Don't we all?
I even now that I'm working full-time, I'm actually contributing extra to my retirement account right now, working for an employer that helps pay for that, and I'm trying to get caught up. But my salary, in order to still be a journalist at this point in my career, is what I made when I was about 40. So.
Does anybody else have any questions?
What other kinds of things did you think about when you were structuring your original partner agreement? When you get started in 2012?
Well, the biggest part that saved us was the dissolution agreement, which is what happens if. And that was, the one partner had a say of if they wanted to sell their shares. She couldn't sell her shares to just anybody. I got to have say.
You had right of first refusal.
Right of first refusal. So I could buy her out, which is what ended up happening. And then
Did you veto the sale without buying her out? If she wanted to sell to someone?
no, I would have had to buy it, or find another person
Right, gotcha.
to do it.
Yeah, but if you said no, she would have had the right to sell to somebody else.
Right.
Which could wreck your business.
Yeah. Well, and that, and that is kind of what happened. We had, anyway. The other things that were in there, that's a good question. I mean, I think it was mostly about, stating that it was a 50-50 partnership and, what that meant. And, but the biggest part that was the dissolution agreement. That's the main.
50-50 partnership in a way is challenging because if you don't agree, you've got partners don't agree, there's no way to resolve the
Right.
issue other than breaking up the business.
Right. And we did have times where we had disagreements, of course, because we were in business together for 5 years. And so, and part of it came down to with her decision to leave was she didn't want to keep expanding. I mean, we had written the business plan and that was what the plan was. I wanted to follow the plan and she wanted to say, hey, let's slow down, let's peel back. And just because that's where her life was at that moment. And it wasn't anything, really between us so much at the end was I wanted to keep going and she wanted to peel back. And so one of us needed to leave.
And we think about partners as some external person. Legally, I do have a partner. It's my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
And even though she has no part in running the business, she has frustrated me once or twice, and she's someone that I have to think about legally because she owns a portion of the business. We were established as an LLC, and she's a minority partner. I think she's 49% or something like that. So that's something you think about as well.
I mentioned that I ended up taking a home equity loan to finance an expansion, and my LLC was just me, but practically speaking, my wife also was a partner in the business, and she had to go along with that, and she did.
And if I had it to do over again, I would leave my wife out.
You would,
She would not be a partner.
yeah. I don't remember why
Sure, this wasn't
I
one.
did it that way. Yeah.
But it
I
is
do want to go home tonight.
Chicago stays in Chicago.
it's also good to note. It's also good to note in some states, and it was the case in mine, that since the business was formed while I was married, it was considered a marital asset. And so there's that too. Just so you know that. So he had to sign off for me to sell it.
How did you set up like your employee structure so that like you are at the top as the CFO and aren't involved in editorial and that it could be sustainable and you could go to Spain for 7 weeks and and sell it in a way that it's not just relying on one person?
I mean, I started when Susan left, I had to start working on processes so that I'd been working really hard for 5 years already at that point. And so I just made a really conscious effort, and I got friends to help, I hired people to help. But I just started putting the structure in place so that that was my plan, was to exit, right? So, so that had a sales process, an editorial process, we had the org chart, everybody knew what their job was, and I just had to grow up. I had to have real job descriptions. I had to start using ADP. I got a real accountant. I got a real lawyer, and I did all the adulting, the business adulting.
How many employees did you have?
I had 13 at one point, but I was scaled back to 9.
FTEs?
All but one was FTE. Yes, everybody was salary except one girl. She was part time. She worked about 30 hours a week, and that was all she wanted to work. So. Any other questions?
So Kelly, that's on some level, that's a fairly large scale business for what would be considered a small business, but it's still fairly large scale. Do you feel you had to make it that big to make it successful, or could you have reached the same destination without having taken on near as many employees?
Yeah, no, I think I could have reached the same destination probably with just the Williamson County sites. It could, because it's such a desirable market. I don't think I had to expand past that in hindsight.
And how big is the population there?
Brentwood has 40,000, Franklin 75,000, Nolensville 11,000, Spring Hill 40,000.
So about 250,000 altogether for the county.
Yeah.
So on the 50-50 partnership, if there are two people who have started a site and everything's been, pretty much 50-50, is there a natural tiebreaker about, who
One leaves.
before that happens? I mean, is there, the person who ends up taking on more of the business role? Does that, is there some way to decide that?
I don't believe so. One of the first things, and I haven't done a lot of smart things, but one of the smartest things I did was I took a course at a community college that dealt with that. That was the very first thing that they dealt with. How are you going to set this business up? And as an LLC, you have voting shares, and technically speaking, my wife has a 49% voting share in terms of what we do. She doesn't exercise it, but
So you made it 51-49 in the partnership? Yeah.
But I mean, with us, if we didn't agree to go forward, we didn't go forward. And it would frustrate me at times because I felt like it was time to do that, but I couldn't. And I wouldn't if she didn't want to.
And that's really how it works with me. If my wife says we have to agree to go forward, and we've never, I've never tried to Bigfoot. Well, I've got one. I'm 51, and when I said there have been instances in which she frustrated my plans, it was that we kind of do make our decisions. If we don't mutually agree, then we don't move forward.
My wife was a big part of our decision to shut down, although I will say that during the elections last year when we had a really bad election fight in our town, she actually said, "You think we should start it up again?"
What'd you say?
No. I like what I'm doing.
Like my job.
I keep telling him he needs to start it up too. I think the ecosystem's a little better now.
Yeah, it was.
One thing that you could look into is, regardless of your ownership split, you can enter into a management agreement when you have an LLC, or if you're partnership agreement, or a shareholder agreement that addresses what happens if you disagree, even to the point of agreeing in advance on arbitration if it's that serious an issue.
Can you tell everybody who you are and what your site is?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Denise Civiletti, and my site's Riverhead Local. We tried to scale up with a move into another town. It just didn't work. I couldn't find anybody to do the editorial into things. Like it was, I had one person who was really passionate, who was also just not the right person. Like I forgot about the video.
You didn't say anything.
But so it just, that didn't work out. So we ended up closing that down. And we, in attempting to address the demographic changes in our community, started a Spanish language edition of our website about a year ago, and that's working out a lot better. But those are things to consider. And I'm a lawyer, and I should know better because I don't have any of those things in place. But I'm partners with my husband. My husband and I started this in January 2010, and it's worked out. He does sales, and I do editorial, and now our 2 adult children are working with us, and a co-publisher right here, my daughter Katie Lazel, and we have a couple of other, 3, 4 other employees, not full time, but one full time. Well, yeah, we have 1 full time, and I guess actually 4 other part timers. So, but we're all in the same kind of like how do you make it? That's my goal, to make it sustainable so that I don't have to be, because my daughter doesn't want to live the life I've lived. She wants to run a business and have a life, so that's what we're working on now.
I have a question on Christina Johnson, pre-launch phase. I'm wondering who are the potential buyers of a news site? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be another competitor type. Like, couldn't maybe a civic organization, a municipality even, be interested in acquiring what you've built?
When I was thinking about what to do at the end of our life, a number of people said, you should sell it to the town. And as a journalist, that didn't work for me because we covered town politics and town government, and you can't have a news website that is somehow controlled by the local government entity, or even like the chamber. What's that? Is it called Pravda? Right. That's a good point. Anyway, that wouldn't work for me, but there are different kinds of businesses that maybe you're not looking at it the same way I did, but if you want to be independent and respected from a journalism standpoint, you wouldn't want to affiliate with an organization that would be that somebody could point to and say, clearly this organization has a point of view.
Government should not own media.
A year after I shut down, somebody else in my small town started a new website called News at Davidson or something like that, and the woman is on the town board, and their traffic is practically zero, and they don't have any revenue, and it's not the kind of business that we ran. It's not a replacement for what I did, and it became an issue in the election last year when she was running, and people said, well, that website is run by the town board member, so it's a mouthpiece for the town, and it didn't work. So anyway, that's my point of view as a longtime journalist. Like I said, there are other kinds of businesses. I'm not sure it would fit into my description of what journalism is, but
Yeah, I think other indie publishers are probably your best bet. But the business broker that I was meeting with all those years said, all you need is somebody who thinks they can run your business better than you do. And that's who's going to buy your business. So, but I think...
a billionaire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you make $1 billion in our business? Start with $2 billion.
Yeah.
That's actually a winery joke. How do you make $1 billion in a wine? Anyway.
That's funny. Yeah. But I think that that's who bought me. It was an independent publisher.
I keep waiting for somebody to do what's called a roll-up of our businesses, but I don't think we're far enough along in our life cycle for an investment group to get together and say, we're going to buy the best local news websites around the country.
I think it's coming.
Actually, I was called by a broker who was interested in buying my business. I didn't even entertain the call, but he said that they were looking to buy hyperlocal sites in different places. So I think that's already starting to happen.
By a show of hands, who's been approached by a group?
Fayetteville.
Oh, okay.
Fayetteville.
I mean, the problem goes back to what Kelly said before, which is, can you show like a year of good positive cash flow and look like something that's sustainable? Yeah. I think we're out of time.
One more question. You just shut your site down.
It was so hard. I mean, one day I just pulled the plug. You know, my coworker and I, we wrote long, tearful columns about why we were doing it, and it was a surprise to most people in the community. And one day we were there, and one day we were gone. And you know, I see people on Main Street now, and they say, "Oh, I really miss you." And you know, it's wrenching. And as I mentioned before, you know, the last election that went by without us there was really hard in our town. And I mean, I don't know what to say. I feel bad about it. As a citizen, I feel really bad about that we don't have something. So anyway.
Is your site still there when people go to your URL?
So now, if you go to our URLs, it comes up to a entry page to Newsbank, which is an archive service, which about a year and a half before we shut down, I signed up with them, and they started pulling my content every day. And so it's text only. None of my photos and all that great stuff we did is there. But anyway.
Thanks for coming, guys.